Hey y'all, and welcome back to another video of my creative life with Kelssweetie, where we read books and we make art. Today we are covering my February wrap-up. This last month I did the I Love Black Horror Readathon, which is a reading challenge that I created sometime last year just to get myself personally reading more Black horror authors, which took off and got everyone else reading more Black horror authors, not just in February, but throughout the rest of the year. Again, I've said it so many times before, but I just want to thank everybody who participated. It's always shocking to me that even one person participates, let alone tons of others. So thank you again. But today we're going to cover all of the books that I read during February. Some are some good ones. Some didn't really hit the mark for me, which was unfortunate. And so I do have a DNF in here. It's a very mixed bag this last February. So let's get into the intro and just get into these books. I will probably have a lot to say today, but I'm gonna try and keep it under 30. Y'all know I love to yap. So we gonna see if I can do it. So as I said in the intro, I don't want to say February wasn't a bad reading month. February was a really weird month for me personally. So my reading compared to January was all over the place. I think I'm starting to get back into it going into March, especially because the book I've already read for this last, for March, starting off March, was so amazing that I'm like, okay, thank goodness. I think I've been saved from the slump. But because my personal life was kind of weird, my February reading was pretty strange. I mean, and also February is my craziest month of the year, no matter what, whether it's art commissions. For some reason, my 9-to-5 work decided to throw 5 million covers at me that needed to be done in 2 seconds. And I wasn't really ready and prepared for that, considering how slow January was. I thought that I was going to be really coasting and then making so much content during the month of February, both for YouTube, and I was basically posting every day on Instagram. That was a lot. I run my the zine for Night Terror magazine, which the March issue, as I'm filming this, the March issue is coming out this Friday. Murderous Mavens for Women's History Month. So make sure if you are not following us, y'all should go follow us. The digital copies are completely free, so there is no reason that you can't see how wonderful our zine is. But yeah, so February was wild. It was really wild. My reading was really a mixed bag. I think that overall, I think it was a very average mid reading month. Not horrible, but not oh my god, I've got so many new favorites. There is a favorite in here. There's 2 basically, I'm keeping 2 of them. I think there's a couple in here that I may go next January who see, we'll see if they're on the chopping block on me donating them, So let's get into my first read of the month, which was Womb City by Trotro Mase. This was a lot. I say that because it's a lot. It is a lot. One, y'all know I average around 300 pages to I'm really good in the 300, 350, maybe pushing 400 range when it comes to a book. I like a mid-sized book. Once we hit, especially because I'm an audiobook reader, once we hit past 10, 11, 12 hours on a book, y'all kind of starting to lose me. It's why I don't read a lot of fantasy. Fantasy and science fiction are known to be long ones, and I truly don't care enough for the world building. I am more so for the plot, not necessarily all of this backstory. It's also why I don't read series. Womb City is, I would definitely say it's a horror, but I would say that it's a fantasy sci-fi horror. It takes place in this dystopian Botswana. Well, not dystopian, but very futuristic Botswana, where people can be body switchers. Body hoppers is what they call them. And essentially you can live, the average life expectancy now is like 300 years, because once you age out of one body, you take your soul is uploaded and put into another body, which is pretty insane. And I will say that there's a lot, like, you have to read over some portions to kind of get what the body hopping process is, but it's a lot. It's that's a lot. Our main character, like, her husband watches her like microchip that's in her brain, because she is a body hopper. He is as well, but there's something there where, like, the person she body hopped into was once a felon, and so she is subject to psychological analyses all the time to make sure that she, like, crime doesn't happen. They say that all of this Big Brother, as per usual, all of this Big Brother, like, watching over these people is to protect people. So crime rates have gone down because they're being preemptive on, like, even if you have, like, thoughts of killing somebody, they're like, no, that's a no. We're gonna arrest you before you can even do it, type of thing. So it's very, like, okay, that's scary. Surveillance. It talks a lot about a lot of different social issues: misogyny, sexism, reproductive rights, because she's currently trying to have a child, but her child is, the thing is they no longer have children within, like, the body. They basically just only do incubated children, which they kind of keep on layaway. And if you or your husband or your partner, rather, do anything that is, like, criminal or anything, you can lose the rights to your child. You lose your baby. And what happens is that baby then gets, like, donated to the Body Hopping Institute. So essentially they're raised as, like, cows for fodder for body hopping experiences instead of actually living their lives. It's so, like, that's just me trying to set the scene. I haven't even gotten to the plot yet. That's how they're using every last bit of this book. And our author Totoro is non-binary. They talk a lot about that as well, because body hoppers, gender isn't a thing when body hopping into another body. They've kind of learned about, like, the essence of a person, but of course there are people who are still very homophobic towards these ideas. Even our main character, her supposed brother that she's adopted from body hopping into his sister's body, is very much like, well, you could be a man living in my sister's body, type of thing, which is a whole other situation. But the plot of all of that is happening to our main character, who is just struggling in the day-to-day of surveillance. She ends up having an affair with another man, and while they're in their escapades, they end up committing a murder by accident. They end up hitting somebody. The soul of that person basically ends up haunting them and slowly, one by one, killing them, in a very, not like ghost type of way, but in a very, like, Walking Dead type of way. It's very cyberpunk and futuristic in this approach to spirits and ghosts, in a way that makes them feel more like zombies. Very Walking Dead, zombie-esque, Evil Dead type of ghost, because they're not ghostly. Like, they can grab you. There's so much that goes on, and at the end of this novel, it is a complete removal of reality, in a way, where the whole world kind of starts over in a very fluid type of energy, which I personally loved it, but I think that it's either hit or miss. Either you're going to be really into the, what was that ending, and that didn't really feel like it was an actual ending, and how did we get here, or you're going to be very much like, okay, I get that this is supposed to be more of an overall message in regards to toxic masculinity and spiritualism and ancestry, and what our spirits actually are, who we are as people and humans in relation to God, to the universe, and all of that. Gender fluidity, who has rights to who, what is the body, what are bodies. I personally really loved how fluid it all got at the end. I think after an entire novel of really getting in the weeds on all of this world building and character development, to get to the end where it was very fluid in this conversation and this very vast conversation of bodies and spirits and who has ownership and who is considered a good person, who is allowed to consider who is a good person, technology and all of that. I appreciate it, and I ended up, I believe, giving this a 4. It was either a 4 or at least a 3.5375 or somewhere along those lines, and I mainly think that I gave it, maybe, if I did give it a lower score, I can't remember off the top of my head, like, because I'm already reading other books, but if I did give it another score lower than that, I think that it was mainly because of how long and vast it was. I think that I'm just not that type of girl where I want tons and tons of world building. If you are, I highly recommend this to you. The fantasy girls who just like a little bit more horror, something a little bit less fluffy, I do recommend this to you. The girls who get it, will get it. But I think if you are very much like, I have a short attention span and everything, then I don't recommend this to you. Because I do think that there were moments where my brain glazed over as I was listening. And not because it wasn't amazing writing, just because I was like, okay, you just took forever kind of explaining how the cars in this world work. And while that's cool and crazy and really interesting, and how close are we, in our current universe to something like that, I just want to know when the horror is going to start. And when it starts, honey, it starts. Like, it's bloody, it's gory, it's body horror to the highest extent. Like, she does not, our ghost does not hold back. So I do recommend it, but I recommend it with a lot of addendums, because I think that if you aren't the right person for a book like this, it can drag on, and you could go, wait, what? And then when you finally get to the end, it may be a lot for you to kind of wrap your mind around what the hell just happened. So yeah, that's how I started off my month. And this took me, I want to say, a week and a half to 2 weeks maybe to read, which is pretty long, especially for an audiobook for me. Highly recommend it. Still really glad that I read it. It'll be staying in my library personally, because I just think that there are so many. Honestly, I would even say that this is a book that you would want to reread, because there is so much information in it, and the ending is so fluid. And it really kind of it's one that you kind of have to sit with to kind of parse through. I think I ended up even highlighting a passage in here. So what if I was a man before I got transplanted into this body? Is it really that bad? Aren't all souls genderless? So I groomed myself to accept this traditional role because I was retrofitted for it. I kept quiet and pretended to love this womanhood that was not mind aware, that only fit too tightly, leaving me breathless. Is that why I had an affair? Because I had power in something? Sometimes I realize that perhaps it's Mama's grief, speaking from losing her daughter. She'd cry sometimes, whispering, "You don't know what we went through. It was hell. She shouldn't have died like that." I wonder if she meant the second or first host, but she'd offer no more information. Perhaps I'm not that different from my husband. Marriage and having a child protect me from the harsh judgment of society and create an image of me that is respectable and allows me to have it all, and my way of thinking doesn't remove how deeply I'll love my children. However, I'll grapple with society's idea that I must take time off work to provide childcare for years. I want a successful career, a family, and power. I want it all like my husband wants it all. Only he gets applauded and I get condemned for wanting too much. Is it so wrong to want it all because I'm a woman? Am I suddenly inhuman and without those desires? I wish they'd stop seeing me as a woman, and maybe then I'd be free to be what I want. So that passage covers a lot. Like, that's what I mean. This book fits so many social issues into a single book, but the overall story and the overall message has to do with gender roles, what's expected from society in regards to gender roles, what's expected out of women versus men, and how does that translate through every single bit of our society. The part that I really truly loved, so there was 2 parts to that passage that I loved. The first half had more to do with the idea of souls being genderless, that our souls themselves, without their bodies, no longer really make sense to a lot of people. If we remove the soul, our personalities, outside of the body, a lot of people in our society don't understand what to do with that, because they have to attach genders in order to have an idea of a person, unfortunately. That's a very interesting idea, that if we were to start to think of ourselves outside of our bodies, how would that change a lot of how we deal with society, laws, rules, all of that? Secondly, the passage after that I really loved was about why women are expected to have different ideas of their success and career than men are, only because of the idea of childbirth. The idea that we are put here to have children, and even if you do want children and everything, you are expected to take care of that child and leave your job, as opposed to your partner who may be male leaving their job and taking care of that child simply because you had the child, simply because you are a woman. And why is it expected that a man who wants to be at the top of his career and his game and everything is applauded and said, oh my God, they're so ambitious. But as soon as a woman says the exact same thing and says, and I don't want to have a child, that a child is not a part of that success story, she's then said, oh, you're too selfish. But men do it all the time and are never asked, like, where's your child in that conversation? Where's your marriage in that conversation? I know that I took up a lot of time talking about this book, but that's because of how much was in here. The other ones, I swear to you, are not as vast. Thank goodness, because it really took me a while to get through all this. The second book that I read last month, I'm already in this month, so I'm trying to flash back to last month, was Devils Kill Devils by Johnny Compton. This is a vampire tale. I was excited to read this because I have not read The Spite House. I know, I should read The Spite House. Again, as I've said so many times, there's so many books on my TBR, and I'll get to them at some point when they make sense, when they call to me, but until then, here I am. This was on sale at Barnes & Noble during the hardcover book sale, and so this is why I got to this first. So I was also really interested in this because it seemed like the vampire story was being approached differently. I'm not, as I've said before, I'm not a huge fan of vampires in their traditional romantic gothic type of way, because I've also found that I'm just not a big fan of gothic tales. But I did like the idea of them kind of being like these demons. And we weren't really given a lot in the synopsis, but Sarita is Afro-Mexican. So she's Black and Mexican. She's mixed, which I also loved. We hardly ever get main characters, especially in horror, that are Black and Mexican or Afro-Latino. And I was really, really happy to kind of see that that's the direction that Johnny Compton went into. And those are things that I still loved about the book after finishing it. What's funny is that my issue with Womb City, which was that it was too vast, is actually the reverse of that is my issue for Devils Kill Devils, which is that it wasn't vast enough. I think that there was an amazing world here that Johnny Compton was trying to build, this world of vampire demons and basically doing a coup for their head vampire, and how our main character is like this bred for slaughter type of vampire bride that has been kind of in the works for the vampires to take over since she was a child. And that the demon vampire thing that has kind of been seen as a guardian angel since they saved her life when she was a child and many other times was actually a demon preparing her for this vampire bride situation. I love the vampires in here because they're not like I've said before, they're not like little bloodsuckers. They're like bite your head off type of demons, which I loved. I think it made vampires a lot cooler, a lot scarier, a lot less just a couple of weirdos with son issues. But I think that Johnny Compton did not do enough plot development and character development in this. I wanted to learn more personally about Sarita, so that I could actually really care about her. I think that her best friend in here was very interesting. We did not learn enough about her, and she was kind of like this baby hoodoo witch type of thing, and in a very modern way, which I love a modern hoodoo witch character where it's just simply she goes throughout her life, she does this, that, and the third, but she has a little altar at home, and she knows when to call the universe and ask for some questions on the spirits and the ancestors, and she's manifesting, and it's real easy breezy beautiful cover girl. It's not like I have to call on the spirits from every corner of the world and just hoodoo hag type of thing. I very much appreciate a very modern hoodoo witch. And I think that her friend was something similar to that, but we don't learn enough about her. We don't learn enough about her husband's family, who gets very much involved, to really care much about them. There's a whole set of secondary characters near the second half of the book who are kind of survivors of the vampires. We don't learn anything about them. So it's just kind of there's a lot happening, But because you don't know enough about the characters, there's no emotional anything for you to care when they get killed off or they get turned or something happens, you know? So by the time you get to the end, you kind of feel like I feel like Sarita kind of won against the big bad far too easily. The fight against the big bad just felt like it was 2 seconds, and it didn't fully make sense to me that they were that easy to kind of defeat. And even there's a scene at the very end where another big bad is fought with by another character, and it just felt like it was a page. After an entire book of working around these characters, you're like, you're not going to give me more than that. It felt like a deadline was given to Johnny Compton, and he needed to get the book in. It had so much potential that I'm upset that it wasn't fleshed out enough. That Johnny Compton actually had something here that was really, like, it seemed really great and seemed like something that I could really have enjoyed, but because it wasn't fleshed out enough, it ended up being a disappointment. So I think that I ended up giving it a 3. I think I ended up giving it a 3, but I also think I kind of gave it out of pity of the plot, and that it actually was more of a 2.5, 2.75 type of thing for my actual experience with it. I don't know if I like highly recommend the book. I think if you want to pick it up, I wouldn't say that it's a complete waste of time. It's relatively not that long of a book. And I think that some of the things, like, I was entertained through some of the scenes. And again, like, this idea of where he took vampires was very fun. I think if anything, like, reading it just so you can be like, oh, I love that idea of vampires. Let me see that somewhere else type of thing is where this is useful and still like a great idea, and also to support the idea of Afro-Latinas being main characters. So we're like 2 books into the month, and to be honest with you, I'm kind of like, okay, so both of those books were relatively good. I mean, Womb City again was good. It was just weird, and Devils Kill Devils again, it wasn't horrible. It was just it was written weird for me personally. At that point, I go into my 3rd read of the month, which this book was a book club read for the Dead Reader Society's Dead Radicals book club, where basically we read books that have some sort of social commentary of some sort or diverse read of some sort. I had found, and I'd been wanting to read this for a while, that was The Deep by River Solomon. I'd found it at the thrift store, which was perfect kismet during the month. And I was like, okay, great. This fits into the readathon. It's an author whose back catalog I'm slowly trying to chip away at, and we're reading it in book club. I usually only read some of the books in book club if I already have the physical book. I already have so many books to read that being a part of book clubs, really, it's like, if I already have the physical book, then I'll participate. If I don't, I'll see you maybe when I see it. Unless it's a book that I have to read, that I'm just like, oh, I'm begging to read that. Let me fit that into the whole thing. Especially because I plan my books nearly a quarter in advance now. But, so I ended up reading this. I also they had the cover that I had been wanting. The Deep is kind of it's about these mer people, essentially, who were created from the slaves who were thrown overboard during the transatlantic slave trade. And the slaves who were pregnant while being thrown overboard, these people were born from those women. So I like that I mean, it's not like, I feel like I've heard that plot line before, and it's a beautiful plot line in its pain, but that was basically the beginning. This book apparently is based off of, which I didn't know going into it, it's based off of a song by like an American rock band whose front singer is Black, Daveed Diggs. They had made the song for NPR, and then River Solomon said, let me write a novella based off of that song. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of different cooks in the kitchen in regards to this storyline. It fell short for me. And I hate that, because River Solomon has become one of my favorite authors. They're an auto-buy author for me now. After reading Model Home and Saarland, I just really, really love their approach to queerness and, you know, struggles within the Black community, emotionally, identity, and also combining so many different genres together to make novels. Like, very, very genre bending and very weird. Like, they just don't hold back. And I've absolutely loved that. I've felt so many things after finishing their books. And I did feel that with this. And I think that maybe it's because it's one of their earlier novels and they hadn't really reached that fever pitch in their writing yet. I think Sorrowland might have been the turning point, but I don't know. I have to read. I have a couple of others in their back catalog to read, and maybe I can say that definitively by the end of the year. But I want to blame it on that because this turned more into this romance rather than this plot-driven conversation around our main character, Yetu, who is basically the historian of her people, which basically the people of the deep do not hold on to their trauma. They don't know their beginnings the whole year. And it's so that they can continue on with their lives. They don't have to walk around with this trauma. But Yetu knows all of it. And she holds all of it all year, except for one day a year where they share it. And it's in an effort for them not to forget their history and their trauma and their beginnings and all of that, but also to give Yetu a break. Yetu gives all of this knowledge to everyone during the ceremony, and then she takes off. She's sick and tired of it. She's like really at her wit's end on carrying around this hurt and this trauma and everything. She goes to the surface. It's kind of like Little Mermaid, low-key. Because she goes to the surface, she falls in love with this other woman who is a two-legger. They kind of have this like very closed-door romance type of thing going on. Yetu realizes that she has to go back to her people who are like struggling because they have now had all this pain for so long. They don't know how to hold on to all of it and everything. And her two-legged companion of some sort has to also leave because she's trying to find her family. That kind of got a little bit confusing as well. I think that there could have been a little bit better movement in the story. I think that moving through the plot was a lot in some portions. And then in the end, they're like her people kind of better understand and have empathy for Yetu because they allow her to like hold all of this all year. But also there's this understanding that Black people, our beginnings are from trauma. Like we would not be here in this country without the traumatic experience that was put on our ancestors. That's a lot. Like, to know that you are only Black, you're not African, you're Black, because of trauma. And that is literally the beginning of your family tree as far as your race identity is concerned. That's a lot to take in that a lot of other people don't have to deal with at all. And then realizing that trauma is a necessary part of your history. And even you can't, by trying to forget portions of your trauma, that you can, one, cut off entire, like, limbs of your family tree. Because, as we know, some of us have many different things inside of us because of certain things. Or just completely cutting off your start and your beginnings and all of that. That we cannot forget our trauma without forgetting our history. And knowing that, how do we deal with that? How do you sort through that? Because that's a lot. That's a lot to deal with. And there's no specific like message or answer necessarily in here, but more so bringing up that conversation. More so bringing that up so that we can start to sort through it. Because some of us, I don't think about that enough. Don't talk about that, how complex that is enough. Especially considering even where we are right now as a country. I think some of us forgot things like racism or trauma existed because we were moving forward in so much that we figured, oh, everyone gets that we just don't want to be racist anymore. Like, those weirdos who are outliers don't get it, but like the majority do. And the problem is that a majority didn't understand what it actually looked like anymore. A majority of us thought we were past it. A majority of us started to forget history, and now it's starting to repeat itself, unfortunately. So again, it was a difficult rating for this because it wasn't bad. It still pulled out that message, and in book club we ended up having a discussion about that. I was the only Black woman in book club, so that was very interesting to have that conversation with other white women and other queer folks as well, about the things that were happening in this book. And I think it created a really great discussion, to be honest. But I think that it's weird because the actual novel, I wasn't like, oh, this was so good. This like really was so much for me. Because I think that it brought up a lot of things for me personally that I already knew, and anybody who kind of knows anything slightly about the transatlantic slave trade would probably already or even the god Yemiya. Like, you would just be like, okay, I've kind of already heard about this. And also, I feel like there was too much romance in here. And the romance kind of really slowed everything down. I think it still had a really good message, and for that, I still think that it's something I would recommend to some people. And it's not a waste of time considering it's a novella necessarily. Like, I feel like if this was a full-length novel and I felt that way, I'd be, like, much more upset. But I just feel like it touched on a message but didn't follow through enough with it because the prose was too flowery. Like, I feel like River Solomon was getting real fancy with their prose and words and making this feel very fluid and beautiful and experimental and stuff, and you can feel that, but I think because of that you don't really get the message as clearly as you should. That was my third book of the month. I'm telling y'all, it was a weird month because I felt like everything I was reading was nearing something that made sense and I really loved, but wasn't hitting the mark. And that was so frustrating for me because I just felt like, by the way, I ended up giving The Deep a 2.5, 2.75. So again, around the same as I'd been giving everything else. I think Womb City I gave 4, now that I'm thinking it back. I'm like, it's all coming back. Womb City was a 4, Devil's Kill Devils was a 3, The Deep was 2.5. I think I slowly started going down because I wasn't being as positive anymore. I was starting to get real frustrated. I literally on a post said, if I do not get a 4, at least a 4, I think I'm going to go into a slump. The reading gods heard my call. They gave me my next book. My first Victor LaValle, and that was The Devil in Silver, and I loved it. I really, really loved it. I think I gave this a 4. I'm pretty positive I gave it a 4. It was either a 4 or a 4.25 or something like that. Now, this book is not your normal horror at all. I think that it definitely spoke more. I think it's a horror in the way that Chain Gang All Stars was kind of a horror in the sense of a social commentary horror. In the sense of, oh yeah, people are horrific. Like, if we just look at society, we could probably get pretty horrific with it. And there is a monster element in here that is kind of like, you're spending the entire book going, is it real? Is it not? Is this a figment of everyone's imagination? So there's kind of that element in there that's a little magical or horrific or just different from just regular literary fiction. But it does lean more horror lit in that way. So just a heads up with that. I didn't go into it knowing that. And I think that at first I was kind of like, so when's the horror thing happening? But slowly I started to realize what it was. And honestly, you really don't care. Our main character in here, Pepper, is a white man, which that was also like, oh, didn't know that's what we were going to be reading about either. And I feel like Victor LaValle did a really great job of writing that character. Personally, it takes place in New York. And it takes place at a mental health care facility. It talks about the experiences of these people. Pepper gets put in there after being in an altercation with a kind of girlfriend, kind of not his girlfriend's ex. And the police end up taking him in there after he attacks a police officer, not knowing he was a police officer because he was in street clothes. You find out that happens to, of course, a lot of people where they're, some undercover police officer or police officer in street clothes or even just a police period end up putting people in mental health care facilities just because they technically can't take you to the police station or take you to jail. So through loopholes and through them trying to get their hours up and stuff, they will take you. And that's how some people get put in these care facilities, either if they're lucky for a short hold or if they're sitting there and they get evaluated and it feels as if they need to stay. The criteria for being considered needing to be under health watch is very flimsy. Very, very flimsy. Simply being emotional can be considered needing to put you under health watch. And they talk about that in this book. They talk about, you're going through the entire book feeling for Pepper because you're thinking, he doesn't need to be there. But by the time you get to the end of the book, there's also this consideration that maybe he does. And then that makes you question, so what does that mean for any of us then? A lot of this, and again, I'll compare it to Chain Gang All Stars, it goes through the entire book, does something similar that Chain Gang All Stars does, where in between the book, you're getting these facts and stuff about the healthcare system. You're getting these facts about how people have died under health watch, how people get put in immigrants who get put into mental hospitals, How are children put into mental hospitals? How do children migrate from child health care facilities into mental health hospitals? Suicide watch. How are deaths treated on mental health floors? There is so much that goes on in this book that honestly should make you so upset, but also make you so scared for people who get put into mental health care facilities. Because at the end of the day, unfortunately, actually caring and healing is not the prime concern. It's removing them from society because no one has the tools necessary to do what they need to do to heal them. And hospitals don't have the budgets necessary to do what they need to do to treat them properly and humanely. The story and what happened throughout here, which I did really like that Victor LaValle did, because I feel like in a lot of like Girl Interrupted, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, like these stories that take place in mental health care facilities really are like horrific, and they kind of feel voyeuristic, where it's just like, oh, let's see how much pain these people can go through when being, so avoid getting put in a mental health care facility. But one thing that I really love that Victor LaValle did is that half of those stories, yes, feel that way, because to not have those in there would be remiss. It would be like, well, that's a lie. But the other half of them do have these success stories of people getting out, of people and getting out in different types of ways. That's unfortunately, I think, and I read a couple of reviews who said this, that some of these endings felt a bit like unrealistic. Like how, I really, really recommend this. I don't want to ruin any of the stories, but my main concern is that why do we find it more realistic of somebody dying in a mental health care facility than somebody actually getting out? And if that's our main idea, that if you get put in a mental health care facility, you'll probably die there, just as I talked about in Chain Gang All-Stars in regards to prisons, then it's clear that society knows that these systems don't work, and we're still not doing anything for them. We're still putting people in them. And that's an even bigger conversation and a concern. I also liked how on the end of this, Pepper ends up, you don't know if Pepper got out or not. And I think it has more to do with where your conscience and your moral and your positivity is by the time you end this book in regards to like all the information you've been given. I also love that they kind of included some things about Vincent Van Gogh, who was mentally, you could definitely say Vincent Van Gogh was not mentally well, but also to learn more about the fact that people have dubbed him crazy. And that in all honesty, he probably just wasn't getting the care and everything that he needed because of the time period that he was growing up in, but also just because people didn't want to deal with it. And him being driven to the places he was being driven to. The horror portion of it is because they think that a monster, a devil of some sort, who looks like this, lives in the mental care facility and is killing them. By the time you get to the end of the book, you get an answer on whether there is or not. I will just say that. And I think that it's sad in consideration of what it actually is, or what is actually happening, and how the staff is handling it, how the hospital is handling it. I think that this book was really amazing. It was really great, and I don't think that it was a classic horror, but as y'all know, I have a very loose idea of genres. Genres are very loose things to me, and I feel like this is still horror, but just in a very literal, very lit sense, a very educated type of literal sense. I read tons of unhinged, like, women horror or something along those lines. People who are absolutely off their rocker. This took place in a mental health care facility, and at no point did I go, wow, they're all off their rocker. And again, I have to say, and I applaud Victor LaValle, I think, treated these people like they were humans. He put a lot of humanity within every character in the story. No one felt secondary. And I think that that's something very, unfortunately, we don't see that enough when we're talking about mental care facilities and in different stories and plot lines. And I applaud that. I think that that was very humanistic, and I think it was very empathetic, and I think that was very beautiful of him to do so. In his afterwards, you also find out that he was probably admitted into a mental health care facility just as Pepper was during a certain time, and that the reason why he wrote this book is because when he was writing it, he was working at coffee shops in New York, was seeing these people who were on the street, who were a part of this demographic, walk into the store and really kind of studying how they were and how people treated them. You know, I think that a lot of us are afraid of people who have mental health problems, and instead of being fearful in some and most cases, while of course there are people out there who have mental health issues and are dangerous to themselves and others, more cases than not, that is just not the blanket statement that should be treated. Absolutely love this. I think I gave this a 4.5. I think really positively, I think I gave this a 4.5. The only reason I don't think I gave it a 5 is because there was one thing in there near the end that was just a little weird and it threw me off. I think there was like one little thing that was a little bit weird and threw me off, but other than that, I could not recommend this book enough to anybody who wanted to read Victor LaValle. I don't think it's probably the best one maybe to start out with. Based on what his other books are about, I don't think that this is your classic horror. But I've not read Lone Woman yet, and I feel like that also leans a little bit more lit than like The Changeling. I don't know. Hey, this is my first one, so who knows? Maybe this is his whole thing, and if so, I can't wait to read another one. I think I'll read Lone Woman finally. I'm just not really one for the Western historical stuff, which is why I hadn't picked it up. But I'm more interested now. I'm very interested in reading The Changeling finally one day, and if this is his writing style, that definitely will probably happen. But I cannot thank you that this had finally happened, that I had gotten like a 4 that I was really happy for, because I was struggling. I was really struggling. And unfortunately, the end of my month did not get any better. After reading that fantastic book, I ended a little bit on a weaker note. I don't think that I could, one, because a lot of, like, shit just hit the fan by the end of the month. A lot, like, I got sick, a health flare-up kind of happened, I no longer was working out because of the health flare-up near the end of the month. Zine Fest happened for Night Terror Magazine, trying to finish the issue for Night Terror Magazine came out. I was trying to keep up with content, and I just couldn't get my feet back underneath me to end the month. And to be honest, after 4, I had hit 4. Usually my low level is if I can hit 4 books for the month, we're going to call it a win is a win. A win is a win. I am comfortable with going, I read 4 books this month. There's 4 weeks in a month. I'm cool with that. That's a fine little thing for me. I tried to read these books. I did finish one of them, so I did read 5 last month. But it was arguably a very hard try to read. As y'all know, I wanted to try and read Helen Yoemi's White is for Witching. I'm like reading the title over in my physical TBR. That was a physical read because for some reason they don't have the audiobook. And y'all told me that they do, but it's on Audible, which I hate that they do that. The same thing happened with American Psycho. And unfortunately, I can't read a physical book. Like, I am allotted maybe 1 physical book a month. And it's really because I'm far too busy to try and sit down and read something with my eyes. So, unfortunately, that didn't get read. It'll get pushed to another month. That's completely fine. And there was another book that I wanted to read. Oh, House of Hunger. So, I didn't bring House of Hunger over here because I didn't finish reading it. Actually, both of my Alexis Henderson novels, I did not read. So, that next up is The Year of the Witching. This was a DNF for me. I got through around, I want to say, a quarter of the book. I think what I've realized is that, in all honesty, I could not give a damn about the puritanical society and Puritan witches. And at first I thought it was because, like, I don't care about white puritanical witches, mainly because of my politics of that time. It was the land had been stolen. They were pushing Christianity down everyone's throats. Misogyny was born. I mean, it always has been, but it was moving swiftly. Witches were being burned for simply wanting a right to, like, say something, to say no. It was a very, like, complete opposite of any time that I would ever want to be in type of time. So I don't too much care for reading about it. I also don't like the verbiage. I usually am not a fan of the characters. If I hear savage in a book, complete ick. Like, that's what happened with Slewfoot. I understand that puritanical societies were calling indigenous folk savages, but, like, because of all of that happening, I just don't really care about the storyline, because I'm just like, well, all of y'all suck. So I don't have an emotional anything for this book. And at first, again, I thought maybe if we were talking about a Black witch in that type of situation, maybe I would care more. I found out, no, I don't. I still don't care. I have heard that this is a good book. I've heard it. I can see why it may be a good book. I mean, I still got through like 20%. The writing is good. I just really don't care about puritanical society. And you know what? We're going to call this still a win because I thought it was just, you know, me not being able to read Slewfoot, which was really disappointing. It may have been I couldn't get through magic lessons. This is third time's a charm. And I think that I finally realized that it just has to do with the setting. It has to do with the era. I just don't care. I truly, truly just do not care. I think if you put it in a movie, it's a little different. Like, obviously, I watch Hocus Pocus. Most of that takes place during that all takes place during the 90s. Like the only puritanical witch part of it or whatever is the very beginning of it, and that was just to set the scene. Practical magic, same thing. There, you just need to know where the curse came from, and then let's move on with the story that takes place during the 90s. Like, that's it. I just can't do a whole storyline in it. So still a win in the sense that I found that out about myself in my reading. So I'm not going to pick up any more books that have to do with that. No matter how many people say it's really good. I just know myself. So this will be getting donated sometime next year. I think I'm kind of thinking of starting a section of my bookcase that's kind of like, hey, so that you're not shifting through a lot of these books come next year, like trying to remember if you hated it or not, here's just a shelf that is dedicated to books that you're just like, yeah, it really was not for me and I'm never going to pick this up again type of area. I kind of had something that was unofficially that last year or the top of this year. And when I redid all of my shelving and made my physical TBR corner, I kind of like got rid of it because it was in another part of my like living room. But now I think I need to bring it back, and I have plenty of shelving that I could possibly do that with. The point is, I'm disappointed. I am disappointed that I didn't really get into this, but it is what it is. So I read that one. I tried to read House of Hunger afterwards. I think I'll pick back up House of Hunger maybe around in October. Because I was kind of into it. The portion, I got to about 20% of that before it was due back for Libby. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to finish it in time for the end of the month. And I really want to get into my femme horror for March. And like, I don't really want to finish this right now. Like, I think I just need a change of pace. But I think I'll definitely come back to House of Hunger. And I can see myself liking House of Hunger, possibly. It does take place, it's not puritanical, but it does take place during like the industrial age in New York. No, not New York. What am I talking about? In the South. In the industrial age in the South. And I think it was really interesting because her brother was dealing with a sickness that I think is equivocal to the AIDS epidemic. But of course, like during that time, they did not have a word for it. And I think that it was really great because it's not just like it just popped up out of nowhere. Like this was something, this has existed always. And I like very much that they included that in the book, and how they talked about it, I think was really well done to still stay era appropriate. While it made you kind of put the pieces together for her brother, who is horrible. He becomes basically extremely horrible because of the sickness just eating away at him and his brain and everything. So it actually had me very interested. I also was more interested in the main character in that one. I feel like the main character in this one was a little, she was kind of grating on me a little bit. Emmanuel was a little, but again, she was brought up as a part of this puritanical society, and that comes with its own set of challenges. So I think I'll come back to House of Hunger. I could see myself coming back to that maybe in October. Like once it gets all fall, I could see like, oh, let me read a vampire novel, and I could see that one coming up. Or maybe come June. I don't see it happening in June because there's far too much queer horror that I already have on my list to read. But, and I know that there's a sapphic romance in there, which I care far more for. So, all that being said, those were basically my last, no, those weren't my last two, but those were two other ones, close to last, books that I tried to read, but those are my DNFs of the month, which were unfortunately two Alexis Henderson books, but at least one's a soft DNF. I'm coming back to it. This one's a hard one, but it came with a lesson. We love that. Okay, moving on to our last book that I finished for the month, which was for my book club, the Sweethearts Book Club. Please follow us over in Fable. This month, we've already picked our March sweet read for the month, and that is The Eyes Are the Best Part by Monica Kim. I've already finished the book, and it is amazing, and I really do feel like it was the better choice to have that be our read for the month of March for Women's History Month and women's rights and the conversation around all of that. I think that was a perfect book instead of saving it until May for AAPI month, because the topic is just that message is so great. You guys will hear it in my wrap up for next month and everything, but just I blew through it. It was absolutely amazing. I think I gave it a 4.5, and again, it was just for something small, but I'll talk about it more when the time comes. But go follow us over there to join the book club and to discuss what, the book for the month. The book for last month was Flowers from the Void by Gianni Washington. This was a collection of horror stories, a short horror story collection. I think this was a mid-read for me personally. Once again, loved the cover. I loved let's start with the positives. I love what Washington did in regards to really trying their best to make sure every single short story was something very different from the next one. I think I've talked about this before, and why I love The Wishing Pool by Tanana Reeve Dew so much is because it did not feel like all of these stories were written by the same person. I think one thing that I've run into with short story collections by the same author is that the person sits down and they kind of get into this train of thought where all of the stories start to kind of sound the same because they're just in that same think tank instead of each one being their standalone. I think Gianni Washington did the same with this book. I don't feel like I read any of them and went, this one kind of sounded like the last one. And I really think that they tried to even change up their writing style in order to fit the style of the story they were telling. I think that some of these were very unsettling, and I also think that there's some favorites in here. I don't think there's enough favorites for me to think that I love this book. I think there's enough in there for me to individually recommend those stories to people, but not enough. Like, the ones that didn't hit really didn't hit for me. But the ones that did hit, I was like, oh, that was good. I would actually maybe even want a full-length novel of that. I think it starts off very, very creepy, and all of us in the book club agreed that the start of this novel was very, very unsettling, very creepy, very, oh, I don't want to read this at night type of thing, which was great. It was very great, and it also made sense for even this cover, like this entity and everything. It was really, really like and very, I don't know, I don't have the word to explain it, but it was unsettling. And then going into the very first chapter, or like the very first story rather, it talks about hell and this like angel, I don't want to say angel, but like this demon who like gathers souls for hell in this very corporate type of way. And that was very scary and unsettling, and I could also I could see it. Like, it was very visual. It was arguably one of their stronger stories in the book, and it was a great start. Going from there, we did go, I'm like looking for the here, the list of them. Going from there, it went into a puritanical witch story, but it actually worked for me, which now I'm like, I want you to write a full-length novel of it, because it was about a black witch who she had been brought over here from slavery, had kind of, using her hoodoo and everything from the homeland, had broken from her chains and her masters, somehow formed a relationship with a puritanical witch who had, they'd fallen in love with each other. It talked a little bit about the misunderstandings and issues that was in that relationship because of the fact that she was a white puritanical witch versus her being black and everything, and also having issues with trying to remember who she was because she lost a lot of that through slavery, lost her name, lost her, like, the natural magic that was within her, but not necessarily remembering what the practice was. And a lot of the story had to do with rediscovering who you were and finding that power again, and her finding that power against this coven of witches who were acting very holier than thou against her because she could not get down their practices, and her realizing that they weren't her practices to absorb, that she had her own, and she ends up finding them during this test of strength in order to invite her into the coven. And also finding that she's like much stronger in her magic than these puritanical witches. I really love that idea. I really, really like the story. Now, I think it took her a little bit to get the writing cadence down because Washington was trying to make her writing very similar in writing style to the old English era that she was writing about. So the writing shifted tone a lot from the one that was before it, which was appreciative artistically, but I think that it did take her a while to kind of get her footing with it. And then once she did, like, you really understood what was going on. It wasn't so hard for you to read it. From there, it went into Under Your Skin. What was Under Your Skin about? Oh, Under Your Skin was the Frankenstein type of retelling. That was amazing and heartbreaking. And that one had to do with a high schooler who, honestly, he was a black high schooler, had a lot of depression, a lot of self-worth issues. He was queer. Finding another boy in his class who was very sure of himself, was a white boy, but he begins beating him, and like these metaphors and conversations of how a lot of, unfortunately, especially queer men, end up in these very abusive relationships because of lack of self-worth and because of a misunderstanding of trying to balance masculinity with love, not being really shown or having a lot of examples of what that looks like, and all of that. I think that it was very moving in that conversation. I think that she approached the like this remaking of Frankenstein from a very fresh perspective, in my opinion. And you could really visually see like the inside of this kid's house, see like how weird and strange and unsettling his like family unit was. And then when you kind of get to the end and there's kind of the like turn of events at the end, I think that the way that they went about it was very interesting, the reasoning behind it, and at the same time it was extremely heartbreaking when you think about what the ramifications are for how that story ended. So again, Under Your Skin was really good. Hold Still, okay, this is where it started to kind of go downhill for me personally. Hold Still, I thought was going to go into granny horror territory, and it didn't. I don't really want to get too much into every single story that's in there because I've already talked long enough, like spoken long enough, especially when I was speaking of Womb City. But it didn't go into this granny horror, unhinged granny type of area. And the ending didn't make as much sense to me because it didn't go into that area. It went in a completely different location. And I don't feel like we were building up to that type of ending. So the ending didn't make sense as a message to me. And a lot of people in the group agreed. They were just saying, that's not where I thought this was going, and now I'm confused about where this really sits. Is it speculative? Is it supposed to be horror? Is it time travelers? Why was she doing what she was doing? Is he staying because he actually does want to be? The rest of them from there on out, for me personally, just didn't really hit as much as like some of those first stories, personally. And I think that a lot of us in the group kind of agreed that it just started to kind of lose its steam. And I think that I feel like personally, if I would have just had maybe those first stories before the intermission, I would have been more okay with just like all those last ones didn't necessarily hit for me, but those first ones were really strong. So I'm fine. But because like the second half of the book really didn't hit, and I feel like she was starting to lose the plot on some of those stories, that's why I kind of ended up giving it a 2, because it just wasn't as enjoyable for me. And I've just read stronger short story collections. So I don't know. Again, it's very hard to think about whether or not I'll keep short story collections, especially considering those first ones were really great to me. Because if you don't like the entire short story collection, but there are ones in there that are extremely strong for you, are you like, okay, well, they're strong enough that I still want them in my library to like talk about them, but the other stories weren't like anything I would really want to keep. It's kind of like an all or nothing type of situation. So we'll see next year when I go and do my clean out and stuff, but for the most part, it is what it is. So that was my entire wrap up for February. As I mentioned, it was a weird month. I went through 7 books. I went through 7 books. I only really read 5. 2 of them were DNFs. 1 was a struggle. I didn't get through Ghost Roots, and that sucked because I really wanted to read that short story collection, but struggling so much through Flowers from the Void, and that was my physical read of the month. I couldn't. I was really trying to see if I could fit that in, and I couldn't. And it's like, okay, well, it is what it is. I now have pushed that because I know I want to read that this year. I've pushed it to April, since April's kind of a free month for me. And if this month goes as well as it's kind of started, if I end up near the end of the month, I'll see if I have any time, I'd like to try and fit that one in, but we'll see. It's a physical read, so my physicals just get really hard because I just don't have time to sit down and read them, even if they're short stories. The other thing is too, is that my eyes get tired very quickly. It's why I don't have a Kindle. I don't e-read, because my eyes just get very tired very quickly reading anything for an extended amount of time on a screen. Even if it's like, oh, these are like, that's the whole reason why Kindle works, because it has the it's something about me reading something digitally, and or just reading period, I just get tired. I can listen to something all day, and it just allows me to my brain can do all the work of building out these like areas and building out these worlds and these scenes. But when it's like, oh, and now you read and then build, it's like chewing gum and walking or something for me, and I just get tired out. So again, things that I'm learning about myself, we will see. But overall, I don't think that this last month was a wash as far as reading is concerned. I still found some really great books that I know I'm going to keep in my library, although there was some things in there that I know I'm probably going to donate. I also learned a lot about what I really do want out of a book, and not simply just picking up books, which is kind of the whole goal of the readathon anyways, is just learning, like, what is it that you like? And I definitely think that was the case this last month. So there you go. I cannot say enough though. You should go out and read The Devil in Silver. It really, really was the highlight of my month for sure. But thank y'all for watching. I definitely said this was gonna be a short one. It wasn't. And I don't know why I thought that this last month being what it was going to be a short video. It is what it is. Y'all love to hear me yap. If you're subscribed, if you're not subscribed, this is what happens sometimes with a wrap up. I go in depth with the reviews. It's just what happens. If you like today's video though, please subscribe down below. Let me know if you participated in the readathon at all, or if any of these books you've read. If not, like, let me know if any of my descriptions of them made you want to read them, even some of the ones that didn't work for me. Like The Year of the Witching. I know so many people love that one. It's a me problem. I know what it is. I'm not saying that Alexis Henderson didn't go off in that book. It's just I don't really care. But please subscribe down below if you liked today's video. Thank y'all so much for watching. I appreciate it. I will see y'all in the next one. Bye.